My father raised his crystal champagne flute at the head of the endlessly long banquet table. His deep, booming voice carried across the massive country club ballroom in Savannah, Georgia, slicing through the low murmur of the crowd. It was a voice that commanded corporate boardrooms, dominated massive construction sites, and demanded attention in every single room he had ever walked into for the last 40 years. The glittering chandeliers above us cast a golden, expensive glow over a sea of the city's wealthiest elites, ambitious politicians, ruthless real estate developers, and perfectly manicured socialites. They all sat in reverent silence. They hung on to his every word as if he were delivering a sermon. He puffed out his chest proudly beneath his custom-tailored black tuxedo, turning his intense gaze toward his golden daughter. My younger sister, Camilla, was sitting directly to his right, gently resting a hand on her slightly swelling stomach, wearing a ridiculously expensive silk gown that caught the light with her every movement. "Tonight," my father announced, his voice dropping into a register of deep emotional resonance that he almost never used. "We celebrate the next chapter of our lives. The greatest gift a man could ask for. Your sister's baby is the first grandchild. The heir we have been waiting for to carry on the sterling family legacy." The room erupted into polite, wealthy applause. The sound of diamond rings clinking against crystal glasses echoed off the walls. I was standing in the shadows near the back of the room, hidden by the heavy velvet drapes. My fingers were gripping a small metal USB drive inside my pocket so tightly that the sharp edges were literally cutting into my palm, drawing a tiny drop of blood. My father waited patiently for the applause to die down, soaking in the admiration. Then, to my utter horror, he looked across the enormous room. He looked right past the sea of wealthy investors, past the floral centerpieces, and locked his piercing eyes directly with mine. He raised his glass in my direction. It was a small, condescending gesture, the kind you give to an underperforming subordinate. "And you, Sloane," he called out, a mocking smirk playing on his lips, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling for 300 people to hear. "When is it your turn? Do not make us wait too long." Camilla let out a soft, mocking laugh that made the blood in my veins run ice cold. My mother, Vivian, sitting right next to him, looked at me with a sharp warning glare. She was silently commanding me to nod, smile, and play my part as the pathetic, single, childless older sister. The sheer audacity of his question felt like a physical blow to my chest. He was toasting to an unborn baby, parading a 4-month pregnancy around as his first grandchild, while my actual, living, breathing son Jasper had just turned 10 months old. My son was currently sitting in a hotel room less than 5 miles away, entirely erased from our family tree. I stood there, feeling the cold metal edge of the flash drive in my hand, knowing that in less than 5 minutes, the contents of this tiny device would incinerate this entire empire. But to understand how a respected, untouchable real estate legacy was utterly destroyed in a single evening, you have to understand the decades of quiet, agonizing humiliation that built the foundation of this nightmare. For 31 years, I was the invisible child. I was the structural engineer who moved thousands of miles away to Denver, Colorado, just to escape the toxic, status-obsessed circus of my family. I spent my life analyzing load-bearing walls, calculating the exact weight a concrete foundation could handle before it fractured, yet I could never quite figure out how to stop my own family from breaking me. If you walked into the museum of my childhood, you would find endless exhibits of my mother and father choosing Camilla over me. The most prominent display would be my college graduation. I remember standing in the sweltering May heat, drowning in my heavy black gown, clutching my civil engineering degree. I had spent 4 years pulling all-nighters, solving brutal calculus equations, and fighting for every grade. I scanned the crowd of proud parents, looking for my father. He showed up 20 minutes late. He sat in the very back row, checked his phone the entire time, and left before I even walked across the stage to receive my diploma. When I called him later that afternoon, standing alone in the parking lot and fighting back tears, he casually mentioned he had to fly back early because Camilla was giving a press conference for her new role as the communications director of his company. My achievement was discarded for a photo op. Then there was the high school architectural model incident. I had spent 3 straight weeks building a scale model of a suspension bridge for a state competition. It was flawless, made of hundreds of tiny balsa wood pieces meticulously glued together. The night before the event, Camilla, who was 15 at the time and furious that she could not use the dining room table to paint her nails, simply pushed it off the edge. It shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. The sound of the snapping wood still haunts me. When I dropped to my knees, sobbing, desperately trying to gather the broken struts, my mother walked in. She did not scold Camilla. Instead, Vivian looked at my bleeding finger, then looked at Camilla's shoes and sighed. "Sloane, clean this mess up," she said coldly. "You almost got glue on your sister's designer heels. You should not have left your little toy in the middle of the house anyway." But the ultimate slap in the face, the rule that truly defined our family dynamic, was the legacy trust. My grandfather had set up a $5 million trust fund. The stipulation was clear: it was meant to secure the future of the family. But my father added his own ruthless, traditional clause when he took over. The trust would only be passed down to legitimate children, those born within a recognized, high society marriage that benefited the family's image. Because I moved away, because I refused to marry a wealthy Savannah politician and instead fell in love with a flight paramedic, I was quietly labeled a disappointment. My lifestyle did not fit their brand. I spent 31 years swallowing this pain. I learned to build thick concrete walls around my heart. I told myself I did not need them. I had a thriving career designing highway overpasses. I had Nolan, a husband who spent his days jumping out of helicopters to save lives, a man who possessed more integrity in his little finger than my entire family had in their combined bank accounts. I thought I was immune to their rejection. But pregnancy does something incredibly strange to you. It cracks open old cement in your heart. When you see those two solid pink lines on a plastic stick, the thick protective callus you built around your feelings shatters. I was 31 years old, standing in my bathroom on a snowy Tuesday morning in Denver, staring at the test. Nolan wrapped his strong arms around me, burying his face in my neck, his broad shoulders shaking with relief. We had been trying for a baby for over a year, navigating the quiet, private heartbreak of negative tests month after month. And in that specific moment, despite every terrible thing my family had ever done to me, I thought a baby could fix it. I thought this new, innocent life could somehow magically heal the broken foundation of our family. I genuinely believed it. Did I make the biggest mistake of my life by trying to reach out to them one last time? How many times do we have to touch a hot stove before we realize it will always burn us? The morning we found out about Jasper, the snow was falling heavily outside our bedroom window, blanketing the Denver streets in a pure, peaceful white. It felt like a fresh start. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone screen. The overwhelming urge hit me right in the chest. I needed to tell my dad. I know exactly how stupid that sounds to anyone who knows my history. If you looked at my track record with him, you would genuinely wonder why I even cared what he thought. But I wanted my dad to know he was going to be a grandfather. I wanted to hear him say he was proud of me. I did not call him directly. The graduation trauma was still there, a ghost whispering in my ear that he would just send me straight to voicemail, claim he was in a meeting, and ruin the happiest day of my life. Instead, I called my mother. Vivian picked up on the third ring. "Sloane," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced, high society warmth she used when she was trying to impress the wives of city councilmen. What a surprise. "Is everything okay out there in the freezing cold?" "Mom," I said, my voice cracking slightly, tears welling up in my eyes again. "I am pregnant. Nolan and I just found out this morning. We are 12 weeks along. The doctor says everything is perfect." There was a pause on the line. A beat of dead silence that lasted just a fraction of a second too long. It was the kind of silence that makes your stomach drop. Then she gasped. It was a sharp, dramatic intake of breath. "Oh, sweetheart. That is wonderful news," she said, her pitch going up half an octave to simulate overwhelming joy. "I am so incredibly happy for you. A baby. Oh my goodness. Let me tell your father immediately. Can I tell him? I asked, feeling a sudden wave of insecurity, reverting back to a little girl begging for a scrap of attention. Is he around the house right now? Oh, honey, he is buried in work right now, she sighed, sounding deeply sympathetic, playing the role of the protective wife perfectly. He is in back-to-back meetings with the city zoning board all day, and you know exactly how his blood pressure gets when he is interrupted during a tough negotiation. Let me handle it, okay? I will tell him over dinner tonight in a nice relaxed setting with a glass of wine, and I will have him call you first thing tomorrow morning. He is going to be so thrilled, Sloane. Just let me pave the way for you. I agreed. I hung up the phone, held my husband tightly, and waited for the morning. I woke up at 5 in the morning Mountain Time, knowing it was already 8 in Savannah. I kept my phone off silent mode. I turned the ringer volume all the way up. I carried it into the bathroom while I showered, placing it carefully on the edge of the sink so I would not miss a single vibration. I put it right on the center of my drafting desk at work, staring at it for hours while I tried to review structural blueprints for a new highway project. The morning passed. Then the afternoon. The sun went down behind the Rocky Mountains, casting long, dark shadows across my office. The phone never rang. By the third consecutive day of dead silence, the familiar, suffocating feeling of being the unfavored child started creeping back up my throat, choking out the joy of the pregnancy. I tried to make excuses for him. I told myself he was just an emotionally stunted workaholic who did not know how to process the abstract idea of a grandchild. I told myself it was not malicious, just a generational flaw that men of his age suffered from. I refused to let it defeat me. Not this time. This was not just about me nursing a bruised ego anymore. This was about my unborn child. I took a deep, shaky breath and called my father's direct office line. The executive assistant, a man named Wallace who had worked there since I was a teenager, picked up immediately. Sterling Commercial Real Estate. This is Wallace. How may I direct your call? Hi, Wallace, it is Sloane. Is my dad around? Wallace sounded genuinely surprised, but as soon as I asked for my father, his tone shifted. He put me on a brief hold. When he returned, his voice was tight and incredibly uncomfortable. Sloane, I am so sorry. He actually just stepped into the main conference room. Can I have him call you back? Please tell him it is important, Wallace. Personal, not business. He did not call back. I called again 2 days later. He was on a golf course. I called the following week. He was traveling to Atlanta to look at a commercial property. I left detailed voicemails. I sent long, heartfelt emails with our latest ultrasound pictures attached, explaining how much the baby was growing, detailing the tiny fingers and toes. Not a single word of response. I would call my mother on the weekends, crying, hurting deeply, and she would flawlessly play the role of the ultimate peacekeeper, smoothing out the rough edges of my father's agonizing absence. Sloane, please do not take it personally, she would say, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. The commercial real estate market is taking a huge hit right now. Your father is working 80-hour weeks just to keep the company stable. I showed him the ultrasound picture, I promise you I did. He smiled so big. But you know men of his generation. They just do not know how to express their feelings about babies until the child is actually here. Give him some grace, sweetie. He loves you. I desperately wanted to believe her. I really, truly did. I had no idea that while I was crying on the phone, my mother was laying the very first bricks to build a soundproof wall around my father. I did not know she was systematically intercepting my emails, deleting my voicemails, and ensuring my name was practically erased from that house. She was playing a sick, twisted game, and I was losing without even knowing the rules. If you have ever felt that crushing weight in your chest, staring at a silent phone, wondering why you are never enough for the people who are supposed to love you, how did you survive it? Because I was barely holding on. Over the next few months, I called that corporate office exactly 11 times. Every single time, I hit a massive brick wall. I was always met with a polite excuse from Wallace, a diverted call, or a voicemail box that never yielded a return call. The constant rejection was slowly killing me inside, poisoning what should have been the happiest months of my life. The stress of being ignored began to manifest physically. I was losing sleep, my anxiety was constantly peaking, and the vibrant joy of my pregnancy was overshadowed by a dark, heavy cloud of family rejection. The breaking point arrived violently during my 28th week of pregnancy. It was a Thursday night. I was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a chicken stew, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Suddenly, a blinding pain shot through the back of my head. It felt like a physical strike. My vision blurred instantly, and black spots began dancing rapidly across my eyes. My chest felt incredibly tight, as if a heavy iron band was wrapping around my ribs, and my legs buckled underneath me. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor. Nolan, who had just walked in the door from a grueling 12-hour shift at the air ambulance base, still wearing his heavy boots and flight suit, dropped his gear and caught me before I hit the hardwood floor. Within 20 minutes, we were in the emergency room. The harsh fluorescent lights blinded me as the nurses rushed around my bed. The monitors were beeping frantically, a terrifying, fast-paced rhythm. My blood pressure had spiked to a dangerously high level. The on-call obstetrician looked grim. They suspected severe preeclampsia, a condition that could easily cost both my life and the baby's life if not managed perfectly. "We need a comprehensive medical history immediately," the doctor said, looking directly at Nolan, his voice urgent. "Specifically from the maternal side. Is there a history of preeclampsia, blood clotting disorders, or early-term heart failure in her mother or grandmothers? We need to know right now before we push these medications to stabilize her." I was too dizzy to speak, my ears ringing loudly. Nolan pulled out his phone, stepped into the busy hallway, and dialed my mother's number. It was late in Savannah, but Vivian answered. Nolan explained the situation rapidly, his voice thick with panic, begging her to get my father, or to quickly recount any family history of pregnancy complications. Because the emergency room was relatively quiet outside of the beeping monitors, and Nolan was standing just outside the curtain, I could hear her voice through the phone speaker. It was not panicked. It was not worried. It was annoyed. "Nolan, really?" Vivian sighed, sounding like she was dealing with a dramatic teenager who had missed curfew. "Sloane always does this. She works herself up into a frenzy over nothing. Harrison is out playing golf with the mayor right now, and I am hosting a charity luncheon for the Historical Society in an hour. I cannot just go digging through dusty medical records because Sloane has a little headache. Tell her to stop overreacting, drink some water, and calm down. I have to go, the caterers are here." She hung up. The click of the disconnected line echoed in the sterile hallway. Nolan stood in the doorway of the emergency room, staring at his phone in absolute disbelief. He looked at me, lying on the hospital bed with wires strapped to my chest, fighting for our baby's life. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. He did not say a single word about her reaction. He just walked over, took my trembling hand, kissed my sweating forehead, and turned back to the doctor, answering the medical questions based on what little he knew. Thanks to Nolan's medical expertise aggressively advocating for me and the incredible hospital staff, they managed to stabilize my blood pressure. I spent an entire week in the hospital on strict bed rest. During those 7 agonizing days, staring at the white ceiling tiles, my phone did not ring once. My mother never called back to check if I was still alive. My father never sent a text. Camilla did not even bother to send a generic hospital flower arrangement. Laying in that sterile hospital bed, listening to the rhythmic, comforting beating of my baby's heart on the fetal monitor, something inside me fundamentally shifted. The desperate, weeping inner child who wanted her daddy's approval finally died. I realized that if I died on this bed today, my family would probably turn my funeral into a networking event. They would use my tragedy to garner sympathy from their country club friends. When Nolan finally drove me home, I walked into our quiet, safe house in Denver. I looked at the nursery we had painted together, the little wooden crib waiting in the corner. I made a silent, ironclad promise to myself. I would freeze them out. I would stop chasing ghosts. I would protect my son from their toxic, narcissistic behavior at all costs. I built a massive concrete wall around that wounded part of my heart and threw myself entirely into preparing for motherhood. And yet, despite surviving that nightmare, despite promising myself I was done with them, I made one final, foolish attempt when Jasper was born. Why do we always give the people who hurt us the most one last chance to break our hearts? Is it hope, or is it just a habit of suffering? Jasper was born on a freezing, rain-soaked Thursday morning in November. The Denver sky was dark and heavy, but inside that delivery room, it felt like the sun had finally come out. He came into the bright lights of the room screaming at the top of his lungs, his tiny face bright red, and he was undeniably perfect. He had my nose, Nolan's calm demeanor, and a thick, stubborn patch of dark hair. When the exhausted delivery nurse finally wiped him down, wrapped him snugly in a striped hospital blanket, and placed his warm, tiny body against my chest, the physical weight of him fundamentally changed the chemistry of my brain. All the lingering resentment, all the deep-seated anger toward my family in Savannah, just evaporated into thin air. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered in the entire universe was this tiny, breathing weight resting against my heart. Nolan's parents had driven through a brutal snowstorm from Wyoming the minute I went into active labor. They were normal, hard-working people. Nolan's dad was a retired mechanic who spent 40 years fixing diesel engines, and his mom was a middle school cafeteria worker. They did not wear designer clothes, they did not care about social status, and they did not know how to play manipulative mind games. When Nolan brought them into the recovery room, his mother immediately burst into happy, sobbing tears, rushing over to stroke my hair. His dad, a man with engine grease permanently stained into the deep creases of his large hands, gently took Jasper from my arms. He kissed my baby's forehead, a single tear rolling down his weathered cheek, and whispered, "Welcome to the world, little buddy. Grandpa has got you." I watched them fawn over my son, enveloped in their pure, uncomplicated love, and a sharp, familiar ache twisted deep in my gut. This was exactly what grandparents were supposed to do. They were supposed to drop everything. They were supposed to brave snowstorms. They were supposed to show up. Despite all my promises to myself, I decided to try one last time. Just one final olive branch for my father. I did not call. I refused to hear my mother's fake apologies or listen to her excuses about how busy they were. Instead, I went online and ordered a custom birth announcement and a keepsake box. I spared no expense. I spent $500 on a heavy, handcrafted mahogany box lined with rich navy blue velvet. Inside, I placed a beautiful, peaceful picture of Jasper sleeping in a knit bear hat, swaddled in a white blanket. I included a high-resolution copy of his official state birth certificate, explicitly listing his name and proving his heritage. On the lid of the box, I had it professionally engraved in bright gold foil lettering, "To Grandpa Harrison, meet Jasper." I packed the beautiful mahogany box carefully into a priority shipping package, taping it shut like I was sealing a precious time capsule. I walked through the snow to the post office and mailed it directly to my father's corporate office building, marking the outside of the box in thick black marker, "Personal and confidential." Delivered directly to Harrison Sterling. I tracked that package obsessively for 48 hours. I refreshed the tracking app on my phone every single hour. 2 days later, on a Tuesday at exactly 10 in the morning, the notification popped up bright green on my screen. Delivered. Signed for by front desk. I kept my phone fully charged and resting right on the center of the kitchen counter. I played the scene out in my head 100 times. I imagined my dad sitting at his massive, intimidating mahogany desk, slicing open the cardboard box with his silver letter opener. I imagined him opening the heavy wooden lid, tracing the gold letters, and seeing a baby with his exact same dark, intense eyes staring back at him. Surely, this beautiful visual proof of life would break through the ice. Surely seeing his own flesh and blood would make him finally pick up the phone and call me. A week passed. Then a month. Then 3 long, quiet months. We sent a beautiful family Christmas card showing Jasper sitting under our decorated tree. Nothing. We sent an Easter card of him sitting in the spring grass in a little blue sweater. Complete, deafening silence. Every time I spoke to my mother on our obligatory bi-weekly Sunday phone calls, she would casually sigh and say my father was just so wrapped up in the new downtown hotel project, but that he sends his love. She never mentioned the heavy mahogany box. She never mentioned the photos of her grandson. I finally, truly gave up. I threw myself entirely into my engineering work and my new role as a mother. I taught Jasper how to crawl across the living room rug. I happily woke up at 2 in the morning to rock him back to sleep. 10 months went by exactly like this. 10 months of total radio silence from the man who gave me half my DNA. I had fully accepted that my son would never know his maternal grandfather and that it was truly for the best. But 10 months later, on a random Wednesday afternoon, my mother made a phone call that set my entire world on fire. Will you ever truly know the lengths a toxic family will go to protect their image? Because I was about to find out. I was standing in my kitchen wearing an old faded t-shirt, using a damp sponge to aggressively wipe pureed sweet peas off Jasper's high chair tray. Jasper was babbling happily, banging a bright plastic spoon against the plastic, completely oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. My phone buzzed loudly on the granite counter. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name. She usually only called on Sundays to perform her weekly duty of pretending to care, so a Wednesday call was highly unusual. "Hi, Mom," I said, wedging the phone tightly between my ear and shoulder so I could keep scrubbing the mess. "What is going on?" "It is the middle of the week." "Sloan, darling," my mother chirped brightly, her voice ringing out through the speaker like a crystal bell. "I simply could not wait until the weekend to tell you the amazing news. We are throwing a massive, spectacular gala for your father next month. It is going to be the absolute event of the season in Savannah. We are combining his 66th birthday with our 40th wedding anniversary. We rented out the entire grand ballroom at the country club. 300 invited guests, a live 12-piece jazz band, imported champagne, the absolute works." "Wow," I said, tossing the dirty sponge into the sink and wiping my hands on a towel. "Sounds like a really big deal. I am sure Dad will love showing off." "It is a big deal," she insisted, her voice bubbling with a frantic, nervous energy. "And Sloan, it is so incredibly important that you are there. Your father would be heartbroken if his eldest daughter did not show up. I already looked at the commercial flight schedules, and I can book you a premium suite at the Plaza Hotel downtown, so you will be comfortable." I paused, looking down at Jasper. He looked up at me with his big, dark eyes, gave a massive toothless grin, and threw his plastic spoon onto the hardwood floor with a loud clatter. "Mom, I do not know," I said hesitantly. "Traveling all the way across the country right now is really tough. Jasper just started walking along the edge of the furniture, and Nolan's flight schedule at the base is brutal this month. I really do not think we can make a cross-country trip work with a 10-month-old baby." The line went completely quiet for a second. The bright, chirpy society lady tone vanished from my mother's voice in an instant, replaced by something much tighter, more controlled, and significantly colder. "Well, I was not suggesting you bring the whole family," she said smoothly, carefully choosing her words. "Nolan must be utterly exhausted from his shifts, and babies hate airplanes anyway. I was hoping you could just fly in for the weekend. Just you. It would mean the world to your dad to have his 2 girls together. Especially because, well, I am not really supposed to spoil the surprise before the invitations go out, but it is a very special night for Camilla, too." A cold prickle of unease ran down my spine. "What do you mean? What is going on with Camilla?" "Camilla and Preston are going to make a huge announcement at the gala," she practically squealed, completely unable to contain her immense pride. "Camilla is 4 months pregnant. Your father is finally getting a grandchild. He is over the moon, Sloan. Ecstatic. Camilla is going to announce the first grandchild to the whole family and all our friends at the party." The first grandchild. The words hit me in the center of my chest like a physical blow from a heavyweight fighter. All the air violently rushed out of my lungs. I reached out and gripped the edge of the cold granite countertop, my knuckles turning stark white from the immense pressure. I looked down at Jasper, my actual flesh and blood. A beautiful, living boy who had been breathing, laughing, eating, and living for nearly a whole year. A boy whose very existence was currently being casually, effortlessly erased by my own mother over a cell phone connection. The first grandchild, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dead, hollow whisper that barely sounded like me. Yes, my mother continued, completely oblivious to the nuclear meltdown happening in my brain. It is just perfect timing. A brand new generation for the Sterling legacy. So you see why you simply have to be there. It is about family unity, Sloane. You need to support your sister. Something deep inside me snapped. It was not a messy emotional break. It was a clean, terrifying fracture. It was not sadness anymore. It was pure, ice-cold rage. I will be there, I said, my voice sounding entirely foreign to me. Steady, calm, lethal. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot in my family went before I made my next move. I put Jasper down in his crib for his afternoon nap, walked out to the back patio, and dialed my sister's cell phone number. Camilla answered on the very first ring. I could hear the faint hum of city traffic in the background. She was probably sitting in her corner office, feeling like the queen of the world. Sloane, to what do I owe the pleasure? Camilla said, her tone slick and overly friendly. Mom finally guilt you into coming to the gala? She did, I said. I kept my tone carefully casual, masking the acidic venom building up in my throat. She also spilled the beans about your big news. Congratulations on the baby, Camilla. That is huge. Thanks, she said, sounding incredibly smug, soaking up the praise. Dad is practically throwing a parade downtown. He is losing his mind. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth actually ached. That is really great. Quick question for you, though. When you guys make this massive announcement at the party about having the first grandchild, is Dad fully aware that my son is turning 1 year old next month? The smug confidence on the other end of the line evaporated instantly. There was a heavy, incredibly uncomfortable silence. I could hear the rustle of clothing as Camilla stood up and firmly pulled her office door shut. Listen, Sloane, Camilla said, her voice dropping into a fake sympathetic, slightly aggressive tone. Let's not do this right now. You know exactly how Dad is. He is a traditional guy. Very old school. What exactly does that mean, Camilla? I pressed, refusing to let her off the hook. It means, Camilla sighed heavily, acting like I was a stubborn toddler. Mom told him about your situation out there. You bolted to the West Coast. You did not get married in the big church here in town. Honestly, Mom told Dad that you and Nolan were not even legally married when the kid was born. She said it was a casual fling. You know how he views things outside of wedlock. It embarrasses him. It ruins the family image. My vision actually blurred for a second. The edges of the backyard swimming in red. Out of wedlock? My parents were formally invited to my wedding. They received the invitations. They RSVP'd no. And to cover their own tracks, to keep my traditional father from questioning why he was not involved in his first grandchild's life, my mother and sister had lied. They told him my son was a bastard child, a shameful secret, utterly unworthy of the Sterling family name. He thinks I am not married? I asked, my voice deadly quiet, vibrating with barely contained fury. Don't shoot the messenger, Camilla said defensively, quickly washing her hands of the guilt. Mom just did what she had to do to protect his blood pressure and keep the peace. If you come to the party next month, just leave the kid at home, okay? Do not make a scene. Do not ruin this special night for me. Let Dad have his perfect celebration, and we can talk about your kid later. Don't be selfish, Sloane. She hung up. I stood in my backyard for 20 full minutes, staring blindly at the green grass. They had deliberately painted me as a reckless embarrassment and my innocent son as an illegitimate secret, all to ensure Camilla remained the golden child, the sole heir. When Nolan finally got home from his shift, I was sitting dead still at the dining room table. I had my laptop open and a glass of straight bourbon sitting untouched in front of me. I told him everything. I fully expected Nolan to cry, to break down, and to suggest we just cut them off forever. Instead, my gentle, compassionate husband poured himself a finger of bourbon, drank it straight down without wincing, and slammed the glass back onto the table. "We're going," Nolan said fiercely, leaning over the table, his eyes narrowing into two dark slits. "For 31 years, Sloane, you have let them walk all over you. They are literally erasing your child's existence so they can have the spotlight. We are going to that party, and we are going to show every single person in that room exactly who the Sterling family really is behind closed doors." Hearing him say it out loud unlocked something profound in my brain. The hurt daughter retreated. The meticulous, problem-solving structural engineer took over completely. You do not hit a corrupt building with a sledgehammer. You find the hidden load-bearing walls, you quietly plant the explosive charges, and you bring the entire structure down from the inside out. If you are boiling with anger reading this, make sure to like and subscribe, because the revenge I plan next is something they will never recover from. "I need to go early," I told Nolan, my mind rapidly calculating the complex logistics of the trip. The anniversary gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening. I need to fly to Savannah on Tuesday morning. I need 4 solid days on the ground to gather undeniable proof. I cannot just stand up in that ballroom and yell at them. They will call me crazy, say I am jealous of Camilla, and have the country club security throw me out onto the street. I need hard, physical proof of exactly what they have done. "I will book the plane tickets right now," Nolan said without missing a single beat, already pulling his phone out of his pocket and opening the airline app. "I will fly in with Jasper on Saturday afternoon. We will stay at an anonymous hotel near the airport, completely out of sight. You give me the signal and I will walk through those grand ballroom doors holding our son." "Are you absolutely sure about this?" I asked, looking up at him, needing him to truly understand the gravity of what we were about to do. "It is going to be incredibly ugly, Nolan. It is going to permanently destroy the family. There is no coming back from this." "They destroyed it first," he said coldly, his eyes flashing with a fierce, protective instinct. "We are just handing them the receipt." I spent the next 3 days turning myself into an absolute ghost. I did not tell my mother I was coming to town early. I let her believe I was arriving on Saturday morning as planned. I rented a discreet gray sedan under Nolan's last name so my sister would not get an automatic alert through her corporate rental account. I packed a sharp dark suit, a high-resolution digital scanner, and a massive amount of cold, calculated resolve. When my plane touched down in Savannah on Tuesday morning, the familiar humid, salty air of my hometown hit my face as I walked out of the terminal. But I did not feel nostalgic. I did not feel homesick. I felt exactly like a soldier stepping deep into enemy territory. The city felt different to me now. It was no longer the place I grew up. It was the battlefield where I was going to reclaim my son's identity. The very first load-bearing wall I needed to inspect was my father's corporate office. I needed to know exactly what had happened to that $500 mahogany keepsake box. Did my father throw it away? Or did he never see it at all? I grabbed my rental car, completely skipped checking into the hotel, and drove straight into the heart of downtown Savannah. I pulled up to the massive glass high-rise that had my family's name plastered on the side in heavy brushed steel letters. It was finally time to find out exactly how thick this web of lies really was. I parked the car across the street, staring up at the gleaming facade of Sterling Commercial Real Estate. The ocean breeze blew through the cracked window of my rental car, carrying the scent of expensive perfume, old money, and deep-rooted deception. I took a deep breath, grabbed my leather tote bag, and stepped out of the car. I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors of the lobby. The familiar scent of lemon polish and expensive leather immediately hit me. It had been years since I stood in this lobby, but nothing had changed. The same imported marble floors, the same hushed, intimidating atmosphere designed to make you feel small. But I did not feel small today. I walked straight up to the massive reception desk, my heels clicking sharply against the marble. Wallace, the executive assistant, was typing furiously on his keyboard. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes widened behind his wire-rimmed glasses. My first move was about to dictate the rest of the war. Would he tell me the truth, or was he part of the lie? Thanks for sticking with me this far. If you want to know what Wallace reveals and how I break into my sister's house to steal back my son's legacy, Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. You won't want to miss the fallout. Sterling Commercial Real Estate, this is Wallace. He had answered the phone just a few months ago, politely blocking my desperate attempts to reach my father. But now, seeing me standing in the flesh inside the massive marble lobby, his professional facade completely cracked. "Sloan," Wallace said, standing up and leaning over the massive mahogany reception desk. He looked genuinely thrilled, but also deeply confused. "My goodness, look at you. It has been way too long. Are you here to surprise your dad before the big gala this weekend?" "Something like that, Wallace," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and pleasant. I needed him to trust me. I needed the truth. "Listen, I actually need to ask you a quick favor. It is about a package I sent a while back. Do you happen to remember a priority shipping box I mailed here about 10 months ago? It had a custom mahogany keepsake box inside. Gold lettering on the cover." Wallace's warm smile faltered slightly. A dark shadow of confusion crossed his weathered face, and he slowly sat back down in his ergonomic chair. He looked around the empty lobby, suddenly looking very uncomfortable. Yes, I remember that very clearly," Wallace said, lowering his voice almost to a whisper. "I signed for it myself on a Tuesday morning. It was a beautiful box, Sloan. I even peeked at the engraving on the lid. I thought it was such a wonderful gesture." "Did you give it to my dad?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Sloan, I took it straight into his private office and placed it right in the center of his desk." "I swear to you I did," Wallace said, his eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. But then he hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them on the desk. "But Camilla happened to walk in right behind me to drop off some marketing contracts. About 10 minutes later, I went back in to bring your father his morning coffee, and the box was completely gone. I assumed he had put it away." A cold, sickening realization began to wash over me. "Did you ever ask him about it?" I pressed, stepping closer to the desk. "I did," Wallace admitted, looking incredibly guilty. "Later that week, I asked your dad if he liked the photos inside. He just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He had absolutely no idea what I was talking about." Camilla was standing right there in the room, and she quickly interrupted, changing the subject to the new waterfront zoning permits. I did not want to push it. I thought maybe I had misunderstood. I stared at Wallace. The confirmation was like a massive physical weight settling onto my shoulders, heavy enough to crush my spine. Camilla had literally snatched the box off the desk before our father even walked into the room. She had stolen my son's introduction to his grandfather. Wallace leaned closer, his expression softening into deep, painful sympathy. "Sloan, if it helps, your dad asked about you just last week. He was looking at an old framed photo of the two of you from a fishing trip when you were 10 years old, and he looked incredibly sad. He asked me if I thought you were ever going to settle down, find a nice guy, and start a family. He said he worries that you are lonely and isolated out there in Denver." My own father thought I was alone. They had intercepted the wedding invitations. They had intercepted the birth announcements. They had stolen the mahogany box. They had built a complete, fabricated alternate reality for him to live in, portraying me as a miserable, unmarried spinster, while Camilla paraded around as the perfect, pregnant daughter. "Thank you, Wallace," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." I turned around and walked straight out of the heavy glass doors. I did not go up to the executive suite. I did not need to see my father yet. I had found the first massive crack in the load-bearing wall, and now I knew exactly where to plant the explosives. My father was not the mastermind. He was the captive audience to a sick play directed by my mother and sister. My next stop was Camilla's house. My sister lived in a massive, renovated historical mansion in the most expensive district of Savannah, paid for by a generous early inheritance bonus that I was conveniently left out of. I knew her schedule perfectly. I knew she had a standing tea time at the country club every Tuesday afternoon with her wealthy socialite friends, and her husband Preston worked late at his political consulting firm. I parked my rented gray sedan 2 blocks away, pulling my sunglasses down over my eyes. I walked down the cobblestone sidewalk and approached her wrought iron back gate. I punched in the old security code that our mother used for absolutely everything, her 40th wedding anniversary date. The heavy iron gate clicked open with a soft metallic thud. It was almost too easy. I let myself in through the kitchen door. The massive house was dead silent, smelling heavily of expensive floral diffusers and old money. I did not waste time looking around at the extravagant velvet sofas or the ridiculous modern art pieces hanging on the walls. I went straight up the sweeping mahogany staircase to Camilla's home office. It was a disgustingly pretentious room, filled with unread leather-bound books, framed marketing awards, and perfectly staged photos of her and Preston smiling for the cameras. I started opening drawers. I was not looking for anything specific, just a thread to pull. I found receipts for Camilla's extravagant maternity photo shoots, costing thousands of dollars. I found invoices for the upcoming country club gala. But then I opened the bottom drawer of her heavy oak desk. It was locked. I smiled grimly. Camilla was incredibly predictable. She always kept a spare silver key taped underneath the middle drawer, a habit she had since high school. I slid my hand under the wood, felt the rough edge of the tape, pulled the key free, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Tucked all the way in the back, underneath a thick stack of old tax files, was a heavy padded shipping envelope. I pulled it out, my hands shaking violently, and dumped the contents onto the pristine leather desk pad. My breath hitched in my throat. There it was. The handcrafted mahogany keepsake box I had spent $500 on, still tightly wrapped in its original clear cellophane. She had not even bothered to open it. She had just stolen it and shoved it into the dark. Next to it was the beautiful cream-colored birth announcement with the gold lettering, completely untouched. And right beside them was a small, sleek silver USB drive. I pulled my laptop out of my leather tote bag, powered it up, and plugged the drive in. Being a structural engineer means I am very good at analyzing complex data sets. When the drive opened on my screen, it was entirely filled with meticulously organized folders. I clicked on one labeled Legacy Trust. Inside were dozens of PDF bank statements. I am an engineer, not a forensic accountant, but the math was painfully, blindingly obvious. Over the course of the last 3 years, exactly $4.2 million had been quietly moved from the joint trust fund our grandfather had set up for both of us. It was funneled directly into a private offshore holding company registered in Camilla's name. She had forged my signature on over 30 different withdrawal authorization forms. But it was the other folder, simply labeled Vivian, that made the blood in my veins run ice cold. It was a complete, unedited archive of text messages and emails between my mother and Camilla going back nearly 4 years. I sat in my sister's expensive ergonomic chair and read every single sickening word. I read how my mother, obsessed with maintaining her image as the queen of Savannah society, had drowned herself in massive hidden debts from terrible, fraudulent art investments. I read how Camilla was using the stolen trust money to quietly bail our mother out, paying off creditors before my father could find out. I read their calculated, sociopathic agreement. Camilla would cover Vivian's massive debts, and in exchange, Vivian would ensure that my father never found out about my marriage or my child. Dad is obsessed with the legacy, one text message from Camilla read. If he sees Sloan has a legitimate son, he will split the remaining estate right down the middle again to provide for the boy. Keep Sloan isolated in Denver. I need full control of the board and the remaining funds. My mother's reply was right underneath it, time-stamped 3 minutes later. I took care of the Easter card she sent. Harrison did not see a thing. I told him she is living in sin and refuses to marry. Just make sure the bank transfer clears by Friday. The gallery owner is threatening to call your father. They had literally sold my son's birthright to cover a gambling debt in the art world. They erased Jasper's existence for $4.2 million. I carefully copied every single file onto my own laptop, encrypting the folder with a password only I knew. I then emailed a secure cloud link directly to Donovan, the senior managing partner of the law firm that had managed my family's business for 3 decades. He was a man deeply respected in Savannah, a man whose word was absolute law, and a man who despised financial fraud. Then, I put the original USB, the unopened mahogany box, and the birth announcement back into the padded envelope, locked the drawer, taped the key back under the desk, and walked out of the house without leaving a single trace. I had the blueprints of their lies. I had the structural weakness in my hands. Now, it was time to bring the building down. Saturday night finally arrived. The air outside was thick with the humid, heavy atmosphere of a classic Savannah summer storm. The country club was crawling with valets frantically parking luxury sports cars and sleek black sedans. I waited in my rental car down the street until I received a text from Nolan. "We are at the hotel. Jasper is fed and happy. Awaiting your signal." I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked through the grand double doors of the ballroom right at 7 o'clock. I was not wearing the modest, quiet clothes I usually wore to blend in. I was wearing a sharp, tailored black silk dress that fit perfectly, a pair of fierce stilettos, and a look of absolute, terrifying calm. My mother spotted me almost immediately. She floated across the room in a heavily beaded ivory gown, a frozen, panicked smile plastered on her face when she saw how confident I looked. She rushed over, grabbing my arm and pulling me aside, away from the wealthy guests sipping champagne. "Sloane," she hissed quietly, kissing the air next to my cheek so as not to ruin her makeup. "You actually came. Where is your luggage? You look very sharp." "At the hotel, Mom," I said smoothly, pulling my arm out of her grip. "I would not miss this for the world." She quickly maneuvered me to a small, insignificant table tucked all the way in the back corner of the room, right next to the swinging kitchen doors where the waitstaff rushed in and out. "Sit here, sweetheart. Your father is very overwhelmed tonight with all the investors, so please just lay low. Do not cause a scene, understand?" I gave her a tight, polite smile and sat down. But I did not stay there for long. As soon as she turned her back to go fawn over a local city councilman, I got up and walked straight toward the audiovisual control booth at the back of the enormous ballroom. The event coordinator, a stressed-looking guy in his 20s wearing a headset, was frantically checking a laptop connected to the massive ceiling projector. "Excuse me," I said, using my most authoritative, corporate engineering voice. "I am Sloane Sterling, Harrison's eldest daughter. We have a slight change of plans for the surprise slideshow during the toasts." The coordinator looked panicked. "Ma'am, your mother gave me strict instructions not to alter the run of show. Everything is timed to the minute." "I totally understand," I interrupted smoothly, pulling 2 crisp $100 bills from my clutch and sliding them seamlessly onto his clipboard. "But my sister Camilla asked me to handle this personally. It is a very special, emotional surprise for my dad. I just need to plug my laptop directly into the main HDMI feed. I will run the presentation myself from this corner, so you can focus on the lighting cues." He hesitated, looked down at the $200, and then nodded, stepping aside. I quickly hooked my laptop into the primary system. Being a systems engineer has its perks. I bypassed his control software entirely, routing the master display directly to my keyboard. Once I hit the enter key, nobody in this room would be able to shut that projector off unless they physically took a fire axe to the concrete wall and severed the main power conduit. At exactly 8:15, the 12-piece jazz band stopped playing. The room fell into a reverent hush as my father stood up at the head table and clinked his silver knife against his crystal champagne flute. He gave his grand, sweeping speech about his 40 years of marriage, praising Vivian as the perfect wife. He gave his tearful toast to Camilla and Preston, celebrating the impending arrival of the first grandchild. And then, just as he had been entirely scripted to do by my mother, he turned his condescending gaze toward the back of the room, looking directly at me through the sea of 300 wealthy guests. "And you, Sloane," he called out, his voice dripping with pity and a mocking edge. "When is it your turn? Do not make us wait too long." Camilla smirked. Vivian glared. The entire room turned to look at the pathetic, unmarried daughter in the corner. My hand rested lightly on the keyboard of my laptop. The moment had finally arrived. The fuse was lit. I did not shrink back into the shadows. I did not look away. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my black silk dress. I looked at the man who had ignored my existence for 10 months. I looked at the mother who had sold me out to cover her gambling debts. And I looked at the sister who had stolen my son's place in the world for $4.2 million. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. I did not yell. I did not have to. The acoustics in that room were flawless. It was 10 months ago. You were invited. I pressed the enter key. The massive motorized projector screen behind my father's head suddenly dropped down from the ceiling with a loud mechanical hum. A brilliant, blinding beam of bright white light cut through the dim ballroom, illuminating the screen. A photograph, exactly 11 feet tall and incredibly crisp, filled the entire wall. It was a picture of Jasper sitting on our living room rug, wearing a little blue sweater, smiling a massive, joyful, toothy grin right at the camera. He had my father's exact dark, intense eyes. A collective, massive gasp rippled through the crowd of 300 guests. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men shifted uncomfortably in their expensive tuxedos, whispering furiously to each other. My father spun around. He stared up at the giant image of the boy. The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sharp crack rang out like a gunshot. "His name is Jasper," I said loudly, stepping out from the shadows of the AV booth and walking slowly down the center aisle of the room, the click of my heels echoing in the dead silence. I pressed a button on the wireless remote in my hand. The image changed. It was a high-resolution scan of Jasper's official state birth certificate, explicitly listing Nolan and me as the legally married parents, completely destroying the disgusting lie about a child out of wedlock. "He is 10 months old," I continued, my voice steady and completely relentless. "You were formally invited to his birth. You were formally invited to my wedding 3 years ago. I sent a handcrafted mahogany box with his photos to your private office. I called your direct line 11 times. I stopped walking, standing just 20 feet away from the head table. I pointed directly at Camilla, whose face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. But your golden daughter right there, and your perfect wife, intercepted every single message. They stole the box. They deleted the emails. They hid him from you." My father's knees physically buckled. He grabbed the edge of the banquet table with both hands just to keep from collapsing onto the floor. He could not tear his eyes away from the screen. He made a sound, a guttural, broken noise that I had never heard a grown man make in my entire life. It was the sound of a proud man realizing his entire reality was a fabricated lie. "Sloan, stop this immediately," my mother shrieked, her perfectly manicured facade completely shattering into a million pieces. She lunged forward, grabbing my father's tuxedo sleeve. "She is lying, Harrison. She is just jealous of her sister. She is mentally unstable, do not look at it." Camilla was already moving. Panic had completely consumed her. She vaulted over her chair in her expensive silk gown, sprinting desperately toward the audiovisual booth at the back of the room to rip the cords out. "Turn it off." Camilla screamed like a banshee at the event coordinator. "Shut it down right now, unplug it." I did not even flinch. I just pressed the button on my remote one more time. The screen flashed to a massive, blown-up screenshot of the text messages between my mother and Camilla, placed side by side with the bank statements showing the fraudulent transfers. The words were 10 feet tall, impossible for anyone in the room to miss. "Keep Sloan isolated. I need full control of the board. I took care of the Easter card. Just make sure the bank transfer clears. Withdrawal amount, $4.2 million. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt utterly suffocating. Every single wealthy investor, every local politician, every high society friend was reading the exact, undeniable proof of how Vivian and Camilla Sterling had systematically stolen from their own family and erased an innocent child just to cover up their massive financial crimes. Camilla reached the AV booth and started yanking violently on the cables, but it was useless. The image was locked on the screen, burning into the retinas of every person who mattered in Savannah. My father slowly turned his head away from the glowing screen and looked at my mother. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying horror. The veins in his neck were pulsing visibly. "You," my father whispered, his voice shaking violently, completely ignoring the hundreds of people watching them. "You threw away my grandson to cover your debts." Before my mother could even attempt to formulate another desperate, pathetic lie, a man stood up from the VIP table near the front of the stage. It was Donovan, the senior managing partner of the law firm. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly, his face grim and entirely unforgiving. He held up a thick manila legal folder. "Harrison," Donovan said, his voice booming with the ultimate authority of a man who controlled the city's legal landscape. "Sloan is telling the absolute truth. I have spent the last 48 hours verifying these documents with our forensic accounting team. Camilla has systematically forged Sloan's signature on over 30 different trust fund withdrawal forms over the last 3 years. She has illegally siphoned exactly $4.2 million into a private offshore account, and she used a massive portion of those stolen funds to quietly pay off Vivian's hidden art investment debts. They conspired to keep Sloan completely out of the picture to prevent a mandatory audit of the family estate." Pandemonium broke out in the ballroom. Preston, Camilla's husband, the aspiring politician who relied heavily on his clean public image, let out a sound of pure disgust. He backed away from the head table as if my mother were suddenly highly contagious. He looked at Camilla, who was standing frozen near the back of the room, her makeup running down her face. Preston slowly reached down, pulled his gold wedding band off his finger, dropped it onto the white tablecloth with a heavy clink, and walked straight out of the ballroom without looking back. "Donovan, you cannot do this here." Camilla stammered from across the room, holding her hands up defensively, tears streaming down her face. "This is a private family matter. We can fix this." "This is federal wire fraud, Camilla," Donovan fired back coldly, his voice echoing in the chaos. "And I have already forwarded the entire dossier to the federal prosecutor's office. You are entirely stripped of your executive position at Sterling Commercial Real Estate, effective immediately." My mother fell to her knees in her expensive ivory gown. She was sobbing hysterically, reaching out with both hands to grab my father's tuxedo pants. "Harrison, please," she wailed, her dignity entirely gone. "I did it for us. I did it to protect our lifestyle, to keep our standing in the community. Sloan abandoned us. She ran away to Denver." My father looked down at the woman he had been married to for 40 years. The love, the respect, the partnership, it all vanished from his eyes in an instant, replaced by an arctic, unforgiving disgust. He violently yanked his leg away from her desperate grasp. He did not yell. He did not curse at her. He simply turned his back on her, turned his back on the screaming Camilla, and looked directly at me. Tears were freely streaming down his weathered, lined face, soaking into his stiff white collar. "Sloan," he whispered, his voice cracking, sounding suddenly like a very old, very tired man. "Where is he? Where is my grandson?" I pulled my phone from my clutch and texted Nolan a single word: "Now." "He is waiting in the lobby, Dad," I said softly, the burning anger finally draining out of my body, replaced by a profound, heavy sadness for the time we had lost. "If you want to meet him." My father did not hesitate for a single second. He walked away from the ruined anniversary cake, away from his sobbing wife and his disgraced golden daughter, and he walked down the center aisle of that ballroom with me. He never looked back once. The grand lobby of the country club was completely deserted, save for the soothing, rhythmic sound of water trickling from the massive marble fountain in the center. As my father and I pushed through the heavy wooden doors, leaving the chaotic shouting of the ballroom behind us, we saw them. Nolan was standing quietly by the edge of the fountain. Resting comfortably in his strong arms was Jasper. My son was wearing tiny khaki pants and a soft white button-down shirt. He was wide awake, chewing thoughtfully on his own fist, watching the water ripple. When my father saw them, his footsteps faltered. The ruthless, untouchable real estate titan of Savannah completely, physically crumbled. He stopped 10 feet away, seemingly unable to bridge the final gap. His chest heaved with heavy, ragged sobs. He covered his mouth with his trembling hand, staring at the boy who shared his exact face. A boy he had been told was a shameful mistake. Nolan looked up. He did not look angry. He just looked incredibly sad for the old man. Nolan stepped forward, gently shifting Jasper in his arms. "Harrison," Nolan said softly, his deep voice echoing in the quiet marble lobby. "I would like you to meet your grandson. This is Jasper." My father took a hesitant, trembling step forward. He reached out with both hands, his fingers shaking violently. Nolan gently transferred Jasper into his arms. My father pulled the heavy, warm weight of my son against his chest. He sank to his knees right there on the hard marble floor, buried his face in Jasper's soft neck, and wept openly, loudly, without a single ounce of shame or pride. Jasper, who was usually incredibly suspicious of strangers, did not fuss at all. Instead, my 10-month-old son reached up with one tiny, chubby hand and patted my father gently on his tear-soaked cheek. My father let out a wet, broken laugh. He looked up at me over Jasper's head, his eyes bloodshot and completely desperate for forgiveness. "Sloan," he choked out. "I am so sorry. I let them build a wall around me because I was too proud to reach out to you myself. I let them steal this from us." I walked over and placed a hand firmly on his shoulder. "I know, Dad. But we're here now." The fallout from that night was brutal, swift, and entirely merciless. When you build a house entirely out of lies, it only takes one strong gust of wind to level it to the ground. On Monday morning, just 36 hours after the gala, Donovan officially filed the federal fraud documents with the authorities. Because the trust funds had been moved across state lines into offshore accounts, the investigation immediately became a massive federal matter. The FBI raided Camilla's corner office on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying out boxes of hard drives and paper files in front of the entire corporate staff. Camilla was formally indicted 3 weeks later. The Golden Girl of Savannah society was plastered across the front page of the local business journals. Completely disgraced, she was forced to resign in total humiliation, liquidating almost everything she owned just to pay for her massive legal defense team. Preston, realizing the money and the political status were entirely gone, finalized a highly publicized divorce. He fought fiercely in court and won full custody of their child when it was born, citing Camilla's felony fraud charges and complete loss of moral character. My mother's fate was arguably much worse, at least in her own mind. When the news of her hidden debts and her conspiracy to steal from the family trust leaked to the country club elite, she became an instant social pariah. The women she had played tennis with for decades suddenly stopped returning her phone calls. She lost her coveted seat on the charity board, then the historical society, and finally, she was quietly asked to resign her membership from the country club entirely to avoid further scandal. My father showed absolutely zero mercy. He immediately moved out of the massive historical mansion they had shared and filed for a vicious divorce, citing extreme financial abuse. He hired a ruthless team of attorneys to ensure Vivian would only walk away with the absolute bare minimum required by state law. She called me once, about 4 months after the gala. She was crying hysterically, begging me to speak to my father, to tell him to reconsider, to remind him of the 40 years they had spent together. "Sloan, you won," she sobbed through the phone. "You proved your point. Please just tell him to let me keep the house. I have nowhere else to go. My friends won't even look at me." I sat in my quiet living room in Denver, looking out the window at Jasper playing in the sandbox with Nolan. "You did not just steal money, Mom," I said coldly. "You tried to erase my son. You dug your own grave. Now you get to sleep in it." I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. I have not spoken a single word to her or Camilla since that day, and I never will again. 8 months after the catastrophic explosion at the country club, my father did something that shocked the entire Savannah business community. He formally stepped down as the CEO of Sterling Commercial Real Estate, handing total control over to an independent board of directors. He sold his vintage car collection, liquidated his massive historical estate, and packed his life into a few suitcases. He moved to Denver in the middle of February. He did not buy a massive, ostentatious mansion in the mountains. Instead, He bought a modest craftsman house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just 6 blocks away from ours. The transformation of Harrison Sterling was incredibly jarring to witness. The intimidating, perfectly tailored corporate titan who used to scream at contractors over the phone was completely gone. In his place was a quiet, deeply reflective older man who wore thick wool sweaters, drank black coffee on his front porch, and spent his afternoons in the garage learning how to build wooden birdhouses. He did not ask for instant forgiveness. He just showed up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, rain or shine, my father is the designated pickup guy at Jasper's daycare. One afternoon, a massive blizzard rolled in, flooding the streets and causing gridlock traffic everywhere. I was stuck at my engineering firm, terrified he would not make it. I called the daycare and the teacher laughed softly. "Oh, Sloan, do not worry. Harrison is here. He actually walked the last mile in the freezing snow because his car got stuck. He is sitting in the reading corner reading a book to Jasper right now. He is soaking wet, but he would not let us call you to worry you. Jasper cannot pronounce Grandpa, so he calls him Bumpa." And the first time Jasper ran across the living room and yelled, "Bumpa," my father actually cried. Last month, on a quiet Sunday evening, my father came over for our usual family dinner. After dinner, Nolan and I sat down on the living room sofa opposite my father. I looked at Nolan, and he smiled, slipping his hand into mine. "Dad," I said softly. He looked up from his coffee mug, instantly alert. "Is everything okay? Is the house settling? I can call a contractor." "The house is fine, Dad," I laughed gently. "We just wanted to tell you something. I am pregnant again. We are having a little girl." My father went completely still. He slowly set his coffee mug down on the wooden coaster. He did not cheer. He simply leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, buried his weathered face in his large hands, and began to weep. It was a quiet, profound crying, a release of so much pent-up emotion and regret. "Dad, it is a good thing," I said, moving over to place a hand on his back. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at me, his eyes intensely focused. "Sloan," he whispered, his voice thick and wavering. This time, please. I want to know on the exact day. I want to be waiting in the hospital lobby. I missed it once because I let myself be blinded by liars. I am not missing it again. Please let me be there. You will be the very first call we make," I promised him. If there is someone in your life who constantly insists on being the bridge between you and the people you love, ask yourself why. Bridges are meant for crossing. The people who build them and then stand there aggressively guarding the gate are not protecting anyone but themselves. Walk around them. Pick up the phone. Show up at the front door with the proof in your hands. Do whatever it takes to let them see what they were told did not exist. The truth will absolutely not deliver itself. Mine almost did not. I almost waited too long. Do not make the same mistake. Many people have told me that I was too cruel, that exposing my mother and sister to federal prison and public humiliation was going too far for family. But if you were in my shoes, watching them erase your child's existence just to steal millions of dollars, would you have done anything differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. If you found this satisfying, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.